Welcome to the Money and Wealth Show. Brought to you this week by AmericanManganeseInc.com. Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. The Money and Wealth Show is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Here is Danielle Park.
Hello, Victoria. I'm here today with Doug Casey, international investor and namesake of Casey Research. We're at the Vancouver Resource Conference yet again. Another year has gone by, Doug, and you're doing a few talks this weekend. And just wanted to get an update from you. It's been a while since we spoke about your topic. For example, one of the topics that you're speaking about, I think, is the Greater Depression has just about started.
Yeah, they actually made a misprint. It hasn't just about started. It actually has started. It started in 2007, and that's when we entered the hurricane, this most recent one. And for the last 3 years, we've been in the eye of the storm because they printed up trillions of currency units all over the world, and that's papered things over and assuaged a lot of things that would have gone bankrupt in the meantime, banks, governments. But now we're coming out the other side of the hurricane, and it's going to be much uglier, much more chaotic, much worse than what we so fondly remember in 2008.
So you think that I sort of agree with that the credit bubble sort of peaked in 2007, and what's happened since has not elongated that cycle, is just postponed the next reckoning. So what does that look like in your view? A lot worse in what way?
Well, unfortunately, the whole world is politically oriented. Everybody looks to government to do something. And governments are much more powerful. Societies are much more reliant upon them than they were during the last Depression, and they are doing something. They're printing up gigantic amounts of money, and the consequences of that eventually it's going to be very high levels of inflation. But I'll say this with the proviso: if they don't print it up quite fast enough, we could have a catastrophic deflation first. So take your choice. We're in between Scylla and Charybdis, and there's really no way out of it at this point, simply because in the real world, cause has effect. Actions have consequences. And the entire Western world, the entire industrial world, has been living way above its means for many years. And we're going to see the consequences of that now. All the debt in the world today is a sign that people have been living above their means. When you have savings, whether you're a government or a company or an individual, it means you've been producing more than you've been consuming and building capital. When you have debt, it means that you've been living out of past capital or other people's past accumulated capital, or mortgaging your future. And that's what all the debt in the world is about. So it's, I think it's rather catastrophic at this point.
So, but honest in some ways, isn't it? Isn't it a revelation? Because if we're truly at the end of those makeshift measures that were never going to work in the first place, we're all about smoke and mirrors, and now you're into a period where the line of credit is literally full or cut, isn't that necessarily going to force some change in behavior?
I certainly hope so. It's starting to unravel first in Europe, because Europe is much more deeply socialistic in both philosophy and in the way their laws are structured than we are here in North America. So it's coming unglued first in Europe. And when they talk about austerity, what does that mean? It means that all these government employees are going to lose their pensions, or lose a lot of their pensions. That means they won't be able to pay their rent. They're not going to be able to go out and buy things anymore. That's necessary. It's good. They've been living above their means. It means that lots of kids that are going to college for gender studies or political science or other such nonsense are going to have to go to work. So this is what the austerity is all about. And a lot of a lot of functionaries working for various governments are going to have to be fired. That's a good thing too. Not only you don't need them, they're counterproductive. But it's going to create huge problems in the meantime. Remember, one of the definitions of a depression is it's a period of time when distortions and misallocations of capital in society are liquidated. And that's what's going on first in Europe. So yeah, there's going to be changes. But the average guy who's used to thinking of the government as a cornucopia is not going to like it. So he'll probably go out in the streets and break windows and things like that this summer and next summer.
So, okay, let's go back to, I agree with what you just said in the sense of things that can't be paid for can't be paid for. It's that way for individuals, it's that way for families, it's got to be that way for governments eventually. Now, on the one hand, people have become entitled in their mentality. They don't want to give up any of the, quote, benefits they feel are owed them. On the other hand, you have the payors in the society, the check writers, who don't want to write any more checks. But surely isn't it both parties have to take their lumps, take their hits? Isn't it that it's not one solution? It's not just austerity. It's that you can't bail out banks anymore. It's not just cuts to payments. It's that they probably have to find ways to get revenue from places they haven't had it.
Well, you're absolutely correct, but I disapprove of the idea of their getting revenue. The governments have been spending way more than they've been stealing, and that is the proper word, from their citizens, or their milk cows, if you would, in the form of taxes. So I think that they should cut way back. But that's number one. They can't extract more from the productive part of society. They've got to start extracting less, because all that money that they take from productive people is, in effect, taking capital that could be used productively. So that's one thing that's got to happen. They've got to cut spending hugely.
Can I just ask you about that? Because I agree with what you're saying about governments, but surely there's a lot of the private sector that has also been, fed and nurtured over the years on this misallocation of capital and government contracts, and money that should never have gone into certain private companies has. So surely I have trouble with the idea that it's just a government, because surely a government is made up of individuals and individuals in business and everyone not wanting to face facts.
Well, you're absolutely correct. And government, which is an entity that has a monopoly on coercion in society, has corrupted society itself at this point. So you're right, much more has to be done. Among other things, I suggest that these governments default on their debt. Greece should say, we're not paying anything. Why do I say that? Number one, it's because you can't make the next generations of Greek taxpayers into indentured servants to pay back that debt that has allowed baby boomers and such to live high off the hog. So it should be defaulted on for that reason. Another reason is it would punish the people that have lent money to the government. And I think as a moral thing, that's very salubrious to teach them a lesson for having lent money to such a destructive entity. Another good reason to default is the governments aren't going to be able to borrow again. So, okay, they've got to cut spending hugely. They should default on their debts. Of course, that's going to collapse the banks and pension funds and so forth that own all that government debt. But that's just tough, I'm afraid. More has to be done. These central banks all over the world, the Federal Reserve in the U.S., all of them, they should be abolished. They're nothing but engines of inflation, vehicles for governments to get money cheaply. And worse than that, they make all kinds of inflationary credit available to society. It's not capital, it's credit, which is a different thing. So they should be abolished too. And I think they all will be. But it's going to be a very unpleasant progress. While it happens, it's like having a rotten tooth. It's very painful to have it extracted, but it's necessary or it'll kill you in the end.
Exactly. So if you look at, coming into June, we've had a nasty few weeks in world markets again. We've got things like junior miners and venture exchange is off more than 50% over the last while. There's really not been a safe part of the equity market or even in some of the commodities space in the last little while. So in the scenario you're describing, how does one posture their assets or their net worth to be able to get through this period and possibly thrive from it, because he or she who is prepared surely can find some opportunity in this.
Yes. Well, one thing that I would count on is that the powers that be are not going to go down easily, so that I expect that there's going to be quantitative easing. It's neat the way they come up with these terms to disguise what it really is. It's a debasement of the currency. So there's going to be QE3 all over the world. And that's going to create more bubbles in various investments. I doubt it's going to happen. It's not going to be in real estate. Real estate's still deflating. I doubt it's going to be in the stock market in general. I suspect they're going to create an actual bubble in gold. And I think that it's not unlikely that they're going to create a huge bubble in the mining stocks, which are actually quite cheap now. It's one of the few areas of the market which is actually cheap, because there's not much that is cheap in the world today.
So are you concerned, though, about the levered participants? So we know there's all these banks still with a bunch of bad debts. We know that the LTRO and the QEs pump into the banking system. Banks aren't lending money in legitimate business enterprises. They're hoarding it. They're trading with it. A lot of the people in the different parts of the market are these very participants. So in the scenario you described, where the banks basically go down in a flame of smoke, is that not a danger to those who are in those markets trying to, quote, invest?
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely correct. And I don't think now's a very good time to invest at all, because I think the earnings of most large corporations are likely to collapse in the years to come, simply because people are going to realize they've been like Wile E. Coyote walking out on air, and they're going to stop buying as they readjust their standards of living. And I think earnings could fall, dividends could fall, PEs could fall, the stock market could fall. Now, on the other hand, at some point, the stock market is going to explode upwards, because people are going to want to put their dollars someplace that at least represents real wealth. The one thing I would not own under any circumstances today are bonds. In fact, because with interest rates at all-time lows, bonds are at all-time highs. They're a gigantic accident waiting to happen.
And we saw the 10-year Treasury go to 144 on Friday, which is, below everyone's, best case forecast was that it could get to maybe 1.5, and here we are at 1.44. But bond yields in other countries like Germany are actually less than that.
I mean, that's right. I mean, owning bonds today it's taking on a gigantic amount of risk for no reward. They're a triple threat to your capital. Number one, the currency, whether it's dollars or marks, even marks, could be inflated out of existence. Secondly is the counterparty risk. They could be defaulted on because the issuer of the bond's unable to pay. And the third thing is interest rate risk. Interest rates go back up to what they were 5 years ago. Forget about what they were 30 years ago, and those bonds are going to collapse proportionately. So you don't want to own bonds. In fact, I'm not even convinced that now I want to own too much cash, because everybody's in cash because they're afraid. You're hardly being a contrarian owning the unsecured liability of bankrupt governments, and that's what cash is.
But there's captive capital in the world, right? There's a bunch of people managing pools of money, and if they're a risk manager or a pension fund manager, whatever, they have to put capital somewhere. They can't give it back and say put it under the bed. They can't put it all in gold bullion. So surely there has to be choices made, and capital will flow. Capital doesn't flow into outer space. It will flow somewhere on planet Earth. Right.
Well, first of all, there are going to be other bubbles created for just the reason that you mentioned, plus the fact that they're creating trillions of more currency units. So you're going to be forced to be a speculator to take advantage of these bubbles. That's one thing that's going to happen. But look, we're going into, we've really just started what I call the Greater Depression. And another definition of a depression is it's a period when most people's standard of living falls significantly. So that means most people's standard of living is going to go down. Their bank accounts could disappear because the bank fails, because the government doesn't bail it out, or if the government does bail the bank out, because all these banks are bankrupt today, their dollars are going to be worth less. So no, there really are no good alternatives. And well, it's a lot like what Richard Russell says. In a depression, there are no winners. The winner is the person that loses the least. And that's really what we're looking at today.
And I think, my grandparents told me about the Depression. It seemed to be people who could grow things, people who could find a way to add a service, people who could learn to live on not having maybe golf memberships and all the stuff we've come to expect as part of a lifestyle today. But, people still need to consume things to be alive. There's still going to be businesses that will have customers. So surely, in a way, I agree with what you say about speculation, but surely to God, that's what we've been through the last 10 years, an environment where it was all really, truly speculation, not a great deal of investing going on. So I'm wondering, that can't continue indefinitely.
No,
right?
It won't. And apropos of what you're saying, I wanted to point out that the most inflated industry in the world today is the financial industry. It's gigantic relative to real productive industries. There are entirely too many people from a historical point of view or any other point of view that do nothing but move money around and buy and sell and so forth. This isn't actually productive. 90% of it's doesn't help to produce anything. So I suspect that the financial industry is going to collapse in size in the years to come.
And then, do you believe that a secular bull comes out of the ashes of a secular bear typically, and that's when investment opportunities will be more plentiful than you've seen them in many years?
Absolutely, because the longest trend in history is the ascent of man. And that's caused in large part by increases in technology. And that's going to continue, hopefully. I expect it will be. So, of course, this isn't the end of the world. It's simply a huge washing out of the financial system, which has become very corrupted
and extractive, very extractive from the real economy instead of supportive of the real economy.
That's exactly right. It serves no useful purpose. And all these people that are just sitting around desks, moving money, getting tremendous bonuses and salaries for playing with other people's money, hopefully they're going to have to go out and do something productive.
So if we look at the future, post-credit bubble world, which we basically believe we're now in, energy, for example, is something that people need to consume. Part of my thinking on that was that protectionism will continue in this new world where it's sort of every man for himself, every country for itself. Don't you think that North American energy, to the extent that, for example, America can consume some of its own product, is likely to be a main theme going forward?
Yeah, I'm bullish on energy because the fact of the matter is there's a lot of controversy about M. King Hubbard's peak oil theory and so forth. But from a geological point of view, there's merit to it. The low-hanging fruit when it comes to oil has basically been found, most of it in the 60s. So that doesn't mean we're going to run out of oil, because we're not. But it does mean that the cost of producing oil is going to go up. And I don't expect that oil is going to go much below, even under the worst circumstances, $70, $65. It's hard to pick a number. But it's going to stay relatively expensive relative to where it was 10 years ago. So is that good or bad for North America? Well, I guess it's
perhaps stimulative in terms of alternative energies, new technologies, making people have to look if it's producing self-sufficient, nuclear, whatever you can do within your own country to meet your energy needs.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the energy sector, actually.
Well, in the world that we're describing, it's not the end of the world. Humans will still be alive. The banking sector will be much smaller. Government will be much smaller. People will still need food, still need water, still need energy, still need some housing.
Yes, but I'm not sure the government is going to be much smaller in the near term. Chances are better. I hate to use such a inflammatory comparison, but maybe what's going on is what happened, similar to what happened in France in 1789. It was an excellent thing that they got rid of Louis XVI, but then they got something worse. So that's entirely possible in all these Western developed countries at this point. Although in the long run, things, yes, are definitely going to get better just because of technology. And there's one other reason too, and this is this is a mainspring of civilization. It's that the average individual, looking out for himself and his family, knows that he has to produce more than he consumes and set aside the difference. That's how he puts away seed corn for a winter and so forth. So billions of individual people will continue to do that, and technology will continue improving. So those two things, individual savings and increases in technology, make me optimistic for the future. But we're going through a rough patch because, as I said earlier, the entire world seems to be centered around governments and politicians and what they do. Everybody sees them as the answer, the solution, the cornucopia. And everything that these people are doing is not only the wrong thing, it's exactly the opposite of the right thing. So this depression is not going to be over in a year or 2 years or even 5 years.
So I'd like to ask you about the U.S. presidential race that's coming up in the not too distant future. I was listening to Mr. Romney, who apparently is going to be the incumbent running against Obama in this election, and he was saying in this speech that, you know, the economy today is clearly Mr. Obama's government's fault, and that he's clearly driven the economy into the ditch. And is that truly the level of discourse that Americans are understanding? Do they buy that idea that it's 4 years of Obama that have created the problems we have today?
It's amazing. Romney's a fraud, and both him and Obama are fools. And of course, Obama was not a good thing for the economy, but he was no worse than Bush that came before him. So this is just politicking, and anybody that believes what these people say is even more foolish than they themselves are.
So you spend a good deal of time in the United States. Do you find
less and less?
Less and less. Do you think people are as naive as that to think that a change of government in the fall is going to, quote, fix what ails the system today?
Well, I certainly hope not. I'm encouraged by the fact that only a little bit more than half of Americans even bother to vote at this point. Maybe that's the half that don't vote realize that it's just a fraud and a swindle and don't want to be participants in it. I mean, I urge people not to vote for much the same reason that, well, you remember during the 60s with the Vietnam War, we used to say, suppose they gave a war and nobody came. And I'd also like to extend that to suppose they gave a tax and nobody paid, suppose they gave an election and nobody voted. So I don't believe in political solutions.
So you believe in individuals making choices that navigate their own life, right? So
yeah.
What specifically do you think people should focus on? If it's not participating in these strawman elections, if it's not, you know, buying into most of the rhetoric, what specifically do you recommend when people ask you, you know, because they can feel overwhelmed as if it's hopeless. I don't believe it's hopeless. I don't think you do.
No,
what do you suggest they do?
Well, you're very fortunate, and most of the audience today is very fortunate to not be U.S. citizens, because Americans are like indentured servants. Even if we renounce our citizenships, the government still wants to tax us for it's horrible and getting worse. So one thing I would consider as a Canadian, if you have significant capital, is perhaps selling your business, taking your capital, and going someplace where you can live tax-free. Keep things together, and look to reinvest when you can really buy cheap in the midst of panic, which will present itself numerous times over the next decade, I'm sure. I think that would be the best broad general advice I could give. You've got to diversify internationally, because as I've tried to emphasize earlier, the problem is primarily a political problem. So you have to diversify politically so that all of your assets and your person aren't under the control of one group of governments, because the people that go into government are increasingly sociopaths. I mean, government increasingly draws sociopaths the way, well, I don't want to use an indelicate analogy, but
surely there's no real government anywhere that seems to be above and beyond what the policies and thinking are today.
They're not. They're all going in the wrong direction at this point. They all are. It's a worldwide phenomenon. So the best thing you can do is to pick up stakes from a place where you're looked at as a milk cow and be a bit of a permanent tourist between 2 or 3 other countries. So you're treated as an honored guest when you're there who can leave, as opposed to staying rooted in one place like a vegetable where you can be treated like a vegetable by your rulers.
So there's no point in running in your country to try and change policy, no point in trying to participate in the leadership of the land, none of that?
No. I think it's not only futile, but it's actually counterproductive because it endorses the political way of doing things, which in my view is immoral.
Well, on that happy note, Doug, I'd just like to say thank you for coming to speak to us, and it's going to be an extremely interesting 6 to 12 months, no doubt, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again before too long.
Well, I enjoy this every year, Danielle. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you.
The Money and Wealth Show has been brought to you by AmericanManganeseInc.com.